So one of the 3 high schools I went to was Our Lady of Victory Baker Hall from Father Baker in Lackawanna, New York on Ridge Road. That's where I graduated from. Nelson Baker, Lewis Baker, Nelson Henry Baker was born on February 16th, 1842. He was the second of 4 sons, Lewis P. Nelson, Andrew, and Ransom. Born to Lewis and Caroline I don't know how to say that. At birth, Father Baker was baptized in the Lutheran faith, the faith of his father. So I stretched these videos out so I could read them. It may not keep up with the video because I'm going to put it back to its regular speed to match with the length of my talking. But I'm going to read all of this at a speed I can handle. Later in this, I put some of my background in some of the information that I speak, not in any of the writing. So if you stay around till the end of the video, you might hear some things about me. The Father Baker story, early life. Nelson Henry Baker was born on February 16th, 1842. He was the second of 4 sons, Lewis P., Nelson, Andrew, and Ransom. Born to Lewis and Caroline Donnell, I don't know. At birth, Father Baker was baptized in the Lutheran faith, the faith of his father. When Nelson was 10 years old, under the spiritual influence of his devout Catholic mother, he was rebaptized in the Catholic Church as a child. Nelson loved to accompany his mother to Mass. The family lived in the small but growing city of Buffalo, New York. Lewis Baker was a retired mariner who took advantage of the increased commerce that the opening of the Erie Canal brought to the Great Lakes region and became the proprietor of a grocery and general store in Buffalo's downtown. As was customary in those days, the family lived behind the store. While there is not a lot of official documentation that exists from Nelson's childhood, it seems to have been a happy time for him. After graduating from high school, Nelson joined his father and older brother working in the store. He was bright, good with figures, outgoing, with a wide range of interests. His future looked promising. Then the American Civil War broke out. The Civil War. In June 1863, General Robert E. Lee and his Confederate Army had moved into southern Pennsylvania. Fearful that the enemy would soon reach New York, the state called for 20,000 new recruits on the evening of Nelson's enlistment. He and his fellow recruits were sworn in and boarded the train for Harrisburg, PA. Nelson's regiment, the 74th New York, served with bravery and distinction there, protecting bridges and an aqueduct as the Confederate troops were forced to retreat. The term of enlistment was only 30 days, and the men of the 74th were expected to return to Buffalo in mid-July, but a dire emergency rose in New York City when rioting mobs began to cause havoc. Nelson and his comrades spent 2 days there, and together with several other companies of the state militia were successful in quelling the riots. On July 21st, 1863, the members of the 74th Regiment returned to Buffalo. Once home, Nelson settled onto his old routine, working in his father's store around that time. His friend Joe Meyer approached him with a proposal. Joe wanted to open a feed and grain business, and Nelson took to take advantage of Buffalo's booming economy. Nelson accepted, and Meyer and Baker, a profitable and successful endeavor for many years, was born. Thoughts of a vocation. During the years that Nelson ran the business for Joe, he was most generous with his time and money to a local Catholic orphanage. He felt that God had been so good to his family and himself that he wanted to give back. Becoming a priest had crossed his mind from time to time, but he was getting older now, and he knew that he had not had the proper schooling to prepare himself for the seminar. Each time the yearning came over him, he dismissed it, but not entirely. One day, as Nelson was returning from a buying trip, he came upon 2 boys carrying a heavy sack. He stopped his horse and wagon and asked them where they were headed. Their answer, Limestone Hill, St. Joseph's Orphanage. Nelson agreed to bring the boys to their home, and while there, he stopped to see Father Hines, the administrator with whom he was well acquainted. One thing led to another, and before the visit ended, Father Hines promised to recommend Nelson to the bishop for admission to seminary. For the next year, the Nelson worked furiously, helping Joe at the store all day and studying Latin by night. By June 1869, he was exhausted and ill. To get some needed rest, he embarked upon a steamer excursion around the Great Lakes. At every stop, he earnestly prayed and meditated on the question of his vocation. When he returned to Buffalo, his mind was clear. The first person to hear the news was his mother, who confessed that she had prayed secretly for years that he would become a priest. Joe Meyer was devastated at losing his partner, but Nelson, showing the resourcefulness that would serve him so well in his priestly life, already had a solution to that problem. His younger brother, Ransom, took over. So it was that on September 2nd, 1869, Nelson Baker ended one chapter of his life to begin a second one in service to our Lord. Seminary life. Although he was almost 10 years old then most of his fellow seminarians at Our Lady of Angels Seminary in Buffalo, the future Father Baker fit in admirably. Wow. With his classmates. He assumed a leadership role from the start and academically excelled, achieving high grades in most of his studies. In November 1871, Nelson became gravely ill, so much so that he received extreme unication, and was expected to die. After nearly a full year of being sick, he was able to recover. Better yet, he was accepted into major seminary and told to get his cassock and report to the seminary the first Wednesday in September. A turning point. Early in the year 1874, Nelson read about a pilgrimage to some of the great Catholic shrines of Europe. He approached the seminary rector with the possibility of going at his own expense as the representative of his seminary. Permission was granted, and Nelson left in May. One of the several shrines on the agenda of the pilgrimages was that of Our Lady of Victories in Paris. There, Nelson felt a special tug on his heart during Mass. Although the pilgrims later visited Lourdes, the tombs of the apostles in Rome, St. Peter's, and the Holy Father in Rome, his mind kept returning to the wonderful shrine in Paris and the possibility of honoring Our Lady in the same way in America. When he returned home in July 1874, Nelson continued his studies at the seminary. In March of 1876, he was ordained to diaconate. Soon thereafter, Nelson Baker became a priest of God on March 19, 1876, the feast of St. Joseph at St. Joseph's Cathedral in Buffalo. Mission. Father Baker was shocked at his first assignment from the bishop. He was appointed assistant superintendent of the institutions at Limestone Hill under his friend Father Hines. The bishop wanted Nelson there because of his business sense and organizational ability. When Father Baker arrived at 1876, St. John's Protectory, the factory that cared for older boys, and St. Joseph's Boys Orphan Asylum for younger boys had a combined debt of $27,000. By 1881, the debt had risen to more than $60,000, an impossible sum in those days. Father Baker thought the situation completely hopeless, and as a result, asked for and was granted a transfer to the parish in Corning, New York, then part of the Diocese of Buffalo. After 1 year there, Father Baker was summoned by Bishop Ryan to return to Limestone Hill as Father Hines' replacement. He would not leave again. Though he was concerned about the substantial problems facing him at Limestone Hill, Father Baker jumped into his new assignment with all the enthusiasm his spirit could muster. Immediately, he was confronted by several creditors who were owed large sums of money. He was blunt. He asked them if they would be willing to take partial payment now and wait for the rest. All but one refused the offer. Then he climbed into his buggy, drove to the bank which held his personal savings, and withdrew every penny he had to his name to pay off the debts. At about this time, Father Baker got the idea to form the Association of Our Lady of Victory, a fundraising initiative that would transform his organization and many others around the U.S. Forever, Father Baker sat down every evening and handwrote hundreds of letters to postmasters all over the country, asking them to send him names of charitable Catholic women in their cities and towns. All of these names came in. He wrote these ladies appealing to their sense of charity on behalf of the boys in his care. He asked for 1 quarter a year in membership dues. The association was an unqualified success. In a few years' time, not only did Father Baker pay off his debts, but he was able to begin a much-needed building projects, a new, larger chapel, and additions to the two institutions. Father Baker's Folly. During the 1890s, natural gas had been discovered in the Buffalo area and across the border in Canada. Late one evening, as Father Baker sat in his office paying the enormous heating bills for his growing institutions, his thoughts turned to the possibility of drilling for gas on the property. According to the local experts, the natural gas supply in the area was limited. His solution, as usual, when he had to make a major decision or needed a favor, he spent a night in prayer before the statue of Our Lady of Victory that he had brought from France. After some days of praying in this manner, Father Baker approached the bishop about the idea and to seek a loan to start the project. Recalling that Father Baker had many times seemed to pluck money out of thin air, His Excellency reluctantly agreed. When the drillers arrived with their equipment, the foreman asked Father Baker where they were to begin drilling. His team was amazed when a huge procession of altar boys, sisters, brothers, and Father Baker exited the church, carrying candles and praying the rosary, then processed into an open field until Father stopped, sprinkled the ground with holy water, took a small statue of Our Lady out of his pocket, dug a hole in the ground, buried the statue, and told the workers, "Drill here, but try not to disturb the statue." Several days later, the project had yet to bear any fruit. Residents of Limestone Hill began to refer to the drill as Father Baker's Folly. Money was running out, and Father Baker had to approach the bishop once more. Bishop Ryan agreed to provide him with additional funding, and at an unheard of depth of 1,137 feet, the well-dubbed Victoria Well came in. The pool struck that day yielded enough natural gas to heat all of Father Baker's buildings, provide gas for cooking, and to even heat the homes of about 50 families nearby. Amazingly, the well is still producing today. A growing campus. Around the turn of the 20th century, Father Baker read in a newspaper of a nearby section of the Erie Canal that had been ordered to be dredged in order to deepen it. During the process, workers found the bones and bodies of infants and small children. The supposition was that unmarried women who had given birth and who had been banished in disgrace from their homes threw their newborns into the canal to drown, thereby ridding themselves of the burden of raising their mistake in poverty. Horrified and called to immediate action, Father Baker set his will to a new project. OLV Infant Home would provide a sanctuary for unwed mothers and their babies. Anyone was welcome and no questions were asked. If a mother did not want to keep her infant, there was a crib and a blanket always set next to the unlocked door of the home so she could deposit her child there during the night. Amazingly, many of the locals disapproved of the situation, saying that the mothers needed to pay for her immorality by having to live and raise her child in poverty. Naturally, Father had no patience for such hard-heartedness. After construction was completed in 1908, in a facility filled to capacity, it became one of Father Baker's favorite places. His nightly rounds always ended at the infant home, where he was often found tucking in little ones, blessing them all on his way out the door. The organization continued to grow in size. The next large-scale building project was the addition of the maternity hospital, which was completed in 1919. Later, as the community's needs changed, the structure was converted to a 275-bed general hospital. His legacy, the dreamer's grandest dream. For many years, Father Baker had dreamed of a fitting tribute to his patroness, Our Lady of Victory. His parish had grown, and the church was unable to hold the thousands who flocked to his masses. Each time he thought he could begin, some emergency arose, or a new building project took precedent, and an expansion of the existing church was delayed. At last, in 1921, when Father Baker was 79 years old, he felt he could begin. The institutions were running as smoothly as expected, and it appeared the time had come. He'd reached out to a renowned architect, Emil Ulrich, and a local contractor, Edward Jordan, and plans became to form. To help finance the project, Father Baker turned to his beloved association of Our Lady of Victory and its charitable members now, numbering in the thousands. In August of that year, Bishop William Turner helped lay the cornerstone. The magnificent church was finally completed by May of 1926, and true to Father Baker's word, not a nickel was owed on it. Upon the shrine's completion and dedication to the Holy Father, Pope Pius XI elevated it to the dignity of basilica in a ceremony held October 3rd, 1926. At the time, it was one of only two minor basilicas in the United States. Dark days. The Wall Street crash of October 1929 ushered in the Great Depression. Years that scattered the nation and its people. Thousands were left destitute, hungry, and or homeless. Western New Yorkers were not immune to the suffering. For many of them, though, a hero arose, Father Baker. Entering his 90s, Father Baker's body began to slow, but his mind was sharp and filled with ways to assist those in need. Those records that have been left behind from that era tell a story of a bustling city of charity that did more good than could be imagined. Diocesan, records from the first 3 years of the 1930s estimated that Father Baker's institutions had served more than 450,000 meals during these dark days. Gentle death of a saintly priest. Death comes to Father Baker after life devoted to charity. Eventually, age caught up with the man who was dubbed the Padre of the Poor by local newspapers. His health had deteriorated during the first part of 1936, but his mind remained alert until he finally lapsed into a coma on July 29. He breathed his last that morning while being blessed by Father Joseph. Abe Burke, an orphan raised by Father Baker himself, would later go on to become Bishop of Buffalo. Father Baker's 60 years in the priesthood were spent sheltering the homeless, feeding the hungry, caring for the sick, and giving hope to the destitute. His legacy lives on today as OLV Charities and OLV Human Services, which provide many of the same kinds of charitable services Father Baker began decades ago. The cause for canonization. In 1987, Father Baker's cause for canonization began when he was named a servant of God by the Vatican. In 1998, I was 8 years old. The Congregation for the Causes of Saints in Rome recommended that his remains be moved into the basilica from nearby Holy Cross Cemetery. The next year, on March 10, his coffin was unearthed and reinterred into the church. On January 14th, 2011, Pope Benedict XVI named him Venerable Nelson Baker. Those connected to his cause remain in close contact with Vatican officials and believe that someday soon Father Baker will be named blessed. Copyright 2015-2025 OLV National Shrine and Basilica, all rights reserved, designed and developed by 360 PSG. Nelson Henry Baker, February 16, 1842, July 29, 1936, was an American Catholic Monsignor in Lackawanna, New York, whom the Vatican has declared as venerable. Venerable Nelson Henry Baker, born February 16, 1842, Buffalo, New York, United States. Died July 29, 1936, aged 94, Lackawanna, New York, United States. Starting out in a parish deeply in debt, Nelson developed a national fundraising campaign that allowed him to build social institutions over the next 54 years that benefited the entire western New York region. He expanded and upgraded an existing orphanage and reform school. He created a home for abandoned infants and unwed mothers, a maternity hospital, and 2 schools, among other facilities. During the Great Depression, he provided food, shelter, and clothing to the needy of all religious faiths. For his work was the disadvantaged and the outcasts of society, Baker was given the name Padre of the Poor. A devotee of Mary, Mother of Jesus, he constructed the Our Lady of Victory Basilica in Lackawanna. Since 1986, the Diocese of Buffalo has worked to secure Baker's canonization. He was declared venerable in 2011 by Pope Benedict XVI. I will leave a link to both sites in the video's description. History. Early life. Nelson Baker was born in Buffalo, New York on February 16, 1842 to Louis Becker, later Baker, and Caroline Donna Ellen, Nelson Baker was the second eldest of 4 sons. Louis Becker, a German evangelical Lutheran, was a retired mariner who opened a grocery store on Batavia Street in Buffalo. Nelson's mother, Caroline, was a devout Irish Catholic. Nelson Baker was baptized a Lutheran as an infant. However, under his mother's influence, he was re-baptized a Catholic in 1851 and raised a Catholic. After graduating high school, Nelson Baker worked in the family store. Louis Baker was said to have instilled an astute business sense in his son. Soldier and businessman. In early July 1863, during the American Civil War, Baker entered the 74th Regiment of the New York State Militia at age 21 for a 30-day enlistment. The regiment immediately departed for southern Pennsylvania, where it participated in the 3-day Battle of Gettysburg. After the battle, the 74th was dispatched to quell the New York City draft riots. After being discharged from the militia in August 1863, Baker started a successful feed and grain business in Buffalo with his friend and fellow veteran Joseph Meyer. Baker began to exhibit a strong interest in Catholicism, and joined the Vincent de Paul Society. He began taking Latin classes at St. Michael's residence in Buffalo at night. Seminary, Our Lady of Victory Basilica, Lackawanna, New York. Baker Hall School was right next to that basilica where I graduated high school from. Anyway, in summer of 1869, needing a vacation from work, Baker took a steamship trip along Lake Erie, using the time to think about his future. At stops along the way, he attended masses at local parishes. By the time Baker returned to Buffalo, he had decided to enter the priesthood. Caroline Baker was delighted with the news, but Louis Baker and Meyer had reservations about his decision. Baker entered Our Lady of Angels Seminary in Lewiston, New York on September 2nd, 1869. In 1871, his studies were interrupted for 18 weeks with a hospitalization for erysipelas. During his stay, doctors lanced 11 areas of cellulitis on his legs. After his recovery and return to the seminary, Baker was appointed head of the chapter of the Vincent de Paul Society. Baker in 1874 joined a group of seminaries on a pilgrimage to Rome. They wanted to support the restoration to the Vatican of the Papal States, which 4 years earlier had been seized by the Kingdom of Italy. While stopping in Paris, France, the seminarians toured the Basilica of Notre Dame das Victorias. Several biographers of Baker note that this visit to the basilica initiated Baker's lifelong devotion to Our Lady of Victory, a title of Mary, Mother of Jesus. After the seminarians arrived in Rome, they toured St. Peter's Basilica and other religious sites. Pope Pius IX granted a brief audience at the Vatican. Priesthood. Baker was ordained into the priesthood on March 19, 1876 by Bishop Stephen V. Ryan for the Diocese of Buffalo at St. Joseph's Cathedral in Buffalo. He returned to Our Lady of the Angels in Lewiston the next day to celebrate his first Mass. After his ordination, the diocese assigned Baker as an assistant pastor to Reverend Thomas Hines at St. Peter's Parish in Limestone Hill, New York. The parish included St. Joseph's Orphanage, run by the Sisters of St. Joseph since 1857, and St. John's Protectory, a diocesan reform school for boys. When Baker arrived at St. Patrick's, the orphanage and protectory were already $21,000 in debt. By 1881, that figure had risen to $60,000. Frustrated by Hines' unwillingness to deal with the financial problems, Baker requested a transfer from the diocese to another parish. They sent him that year to serve as an assistant pastor at St. Mary's Parish in Corning, New York. In 1882, after Hines' retirement, the diocese sent Baker back to St. Patrick to serve as superintendent of the protectory, and the orphanage. It was thought that his business experience would help rescue the two institutions. Our Lady of Victory institutions, 1882 to 1900. Several days after returning to St. Patrick in 1882, a group of creditors met with Baker demanding immediate payment of the orphanage and protectory deed debts. Baker persuaded them to accept a partial payment upfront, followed by a repayment plan. Baker used all of his personal fortune for the partial payment. On taking control of the protectory, Baker removed all the bars from the windows and remodeled the building to establish a more home-like atmosphere. His philosophy was that there was no such thing as a bad boy. To repay the debt load, Baker founded the Association of Our Lady of Victory, working at night. He wrote to postmasters across the country asking for mailing lists of the Catholic women in their areas. He then sent solicitations to these women asking for donations for the orphanage and protectory. The woman could join the association for a donation of 25 cents a year. The charitable institutions in St. Patrick Parish soon became known as Our Lady of Victory, OLV institutions. In 1888, Baker started a journey, the Annals of the Association of Our Lady of Victory, that he sent to the association members to solicit donations. By 1889, Baker had eliminated the parish debt. In 1891, Baker hired a drilling company to explore for natural gas on Our Lady of Victory property, with hopes of offsetting heating costs for its institutions. According to the local accounts, Baker buried a small statue of Our Lady of Victory in the ground and told the drillers to drill there. After several weeks of drilling without results, they finally hit gas over 1,300 feet deep, a very deep, soft spot for natural gas. Having more revenue from his fundraising, Baker in 1893 expanded the protectory and in 1895 added a gym, a recreational hall, and a new high school. 19 to 1936. By 1901, the number of boys at the protectory had tripled to 385. At the orphanage, the total number of children doubled to 236. Bishop Charles H. Colton named Baker as vicar general of the diocese in 1904. During this time, Baker heard stories about infant remains being discovered in the local waterways. This prompted Baker in 1908 to found the OLV Infant Home for unwed mothers and abandoned infants. Baker kept a crib and a blanket outside the infant home for any mother who wanted to leave a child there during the night. In 1916, a fire caused severe damage of St. Patrick Church, making its long-term use unfeasible. In 1919, Baker opened Our Lady of Victory Maternity Hospital in Lackawanna. Baker, by 1920, was ready to start construction of a replacement church for St. Patrick, a shrine to Our Lady of Victory. The Vatican in 1923 named Baker as a protonary apostle with the title of Monsignor, an honor held by only 5 other priests in the United States at that time. In 1926, Our Lady of Victory Shrine was dedicated. Later that year, the Pope named its minor basilica the second one in the United States. With the beginning of the Great Depression in 1929, the OLV institution started providing 450,000 meals to the hungry as well as shelters for the homeless. Boys staying at the institutions produced shoes and clothing for the poor. Baker also provided spiritual counseling for many non-Catholics visiting the OLV institutions in what became known as the Black Apostle. By 1935, over 700 individuals had been baptized as Catholics under the apostolate. In early 1936, Baker's health started to deteriorate. Nelson Baker lapsed into a coma and died on July 29, 1936 in Lackawanna at age 94. Veneration, the sarcophagus containing the remains of revered Baker. In 1987, Pope John Paul II named Baker as a servant of God. Diocese moved his remains from Holy Cross Cemetery in Lackawanna in 1999 and reinterred them under the Our Lady of Victory of Lourdes at altar in the Our Lady of Victory Basilica. On January 14th, 2011, I was 11 years old. Or I was 21. Wow. Pope Benedict XVI authorized the Congregation for the Cause of Saints in Rome to issue a decree recognizing Baker's heroic virtue and designating him as a venerable. Also, I graduated past that point when I was 21. I think I was in Casanova Recovery Systems at that point on Sycamore Street in Buffalo, or Sycamore Ave. I'm unsure what the last part of it is. But anyway, yeah. Legacy. In 1956, OLV closed St. John's Protectory and moved its clients into Baker Hall, a set of cottages that was named after Nelson Baker. In Lackawanna, the Father Baker Bridge over... I was a day student, so I wasn't in those cottages. But anyway, the Father Baker Bridge over New York State Route 5 was named for Nelson Baker, as well as the Father Baker Boulevard in that city. The Father Baker Museum, located in the basement of the Our Lady of Victory Basilica, was originally opened in 1941 as the Father Baker Memorial Rooms and offered a replica of Father Baker's sitting room and bedroom. It has since been renovated several times.